I've talked before about the three ways that we mix colors in watercolor, but I wanted to explore that a little bit further with a fun project today. As you know, as I've told you in the past, one of my favorite mixes to make black is burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And so with this little project, we are going to be painting a blue bottle and a brown bottle, the brown being approximately the same color as the burnt sienna, and the blue bottle being very close to the color of ultramarine blue. And rather than mixing those colors in the pan or even doing a wet and wet and mixing the colors on the page, we're going to do this by layering, by doing what's called glazing. And one thing to keep in mind is that the last color that you put on is the one that's going to be dominant. So if I put an undercoat of one color, I can cover it with another color. So what we're going to do is sort of fun. I've done the drawing, so this is the photograph that we're going to be working from. And I'm going to first paint my brown bottle with blue and my blue bottle with brown. And then I'm going to let that dry entirely and come back and do the final coat with the color that I want that bottle to be. So let's go ahead and dive in and do this. So what I'm going to be looking for is where the darkest places in that brown bottle are going to be painted blue. And then I can grade it out a little bit and have sort of pale blue in places that are darker brown, and no blue at all where it's going to be the lightest brown. So let's have a look at this, and I need to just slant my picture a little tiny bit so I can really see it here. I'm going to start with putting some blue up here in the top. Yeah, that's all pretty much dark right above that little rim. Bits of dark here, but not very much. Oh, and a little tiny bit of blue on this back line. All right. So this looks really weird to be painting this with that opposite color, but it'll look really cool when we change it. Now, something else that I should do here, and that is, this shouldn't be all exactly the same blue because part of this is going to be a little lighter. So let me go ahead and lift those slightly lighter places and grade the edge of this. And that's going to be good. And then that's a light edge. This is a little lighter on this back edge here, but it's still pretty much brown. And then my dark comes down here in a row right on down into here. And I'm going to move that around in just a second, but while I've still got a lot of this blue on my brush, I'm going to come in and paint the bottom of this, which is going to go nearly black, especially here at the bottom. So the darkest places I want to have, and that's going to get some blue there. This is a little bit darker brown over here. Okay, so now I need to rinse my brush and thin some of this out a little bit because not all of this is going to be quite that dark. There's a real light spot. Okay, and then that's going to go, and this is going to be a little bit lighter on this far side of this and a little bit lighter over here, but there's a light spot. And then some of this really goes into a beautiful brown, so I've got to be careful about getting this too much everywhere because I want this to have, what do I want to say? I want this to have a soft look in some places, and some of it is not going to be real dark brown, and some of it's going to be lighter brown. But places that are going to be medium brown, I do want to have some blue in underneath of there to make that medium brown, just like we would when we go to mix those colors. And up in here, and on glass, you get really hard edges on some of the color shifts, and some of the color shifts have soft edges on them. So we're getting the shape of this built with this, with the blue. And then I'm going to thin that just a little bit as it comes down into here. And there's a dark, yes, there's a dark line that right at the shoulder of that bottle. It ends up with a hard dark line there. And one other place that's got to go darker is right over in here. So where I want it to be almost black, I need to have really quite dark blue. Where I want it to be dark brown but not almost black, we want a dark blue but not as dark. And where it's going to just tone it a little bit, I want it thin. So that's basically what we've done here. And oh, there's one other little place back in here. We get a little shift in the bottle where that line comes through from the background, and you can just sort of see it softly through the bottle there. So I want to put that in. Okay, I think yeah, and we'll soften out this little guy. We've got to keep, there's a light spot that I like. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to just soften that because none of that's going to be quite so light. All right, so highlights are pretty much working. I'm not seeing a highlight in my picture there. Let me leave it out there. All right, so I'm going to let that one dry completely. Now let's come in and try the brown in on this other bottle. The cap is absolutely black, so I'm going to have really thick burnt sienna up there. And it's darkest right in the middle here. And then it's going to lighten out a little bit to the sides. So, and that cap had some sharp edges on it. I'm going to come back in a minute on that. Because I'm going to be thinning this paint in my brush a little bit as we go here. And rather than rinsing out a lot of paint, I'm going to come back and do some of those softenings as we go. Now, this has some interesting reflections in this bottle, which are dark. And then the label, yeah, there's some light spaces over there, so I don't just leave that alone. The label in the back, this is part of that label in the back. The label in the back, this label, you can see through the bottle to the label on that other side. And it's dark, but it's still going to get some blue to it, so we can't have this as dark as we're having up above. So that's going to come in just like that. All right, I can rinse that brush and play around with this a little bit now. So I'm going to thin this and bring this a little thinner brown over to this edge, and then find and thin out here a little bit. Find the edge of that, stays pretty much dark right underneath of it until we get to there. Okay. Interesting spaces in here that we get to put in a little bit of this brown into to make that come out dark. And that's okay. And there's a darker space right over on this side here. And this is going to soften up into here. So that's a little thinner because it's going to be dark blue, but not black. And one more little dark line right across here. Some beautiful highlights that I want to be able to maintain. And now this darkness comes on down around this bottom here, bottom of the label. And then there is a little bit of liquid in this bottle. It's a bottle of rose water. And where that liquid is, we get a dark line around it, but it's not solid dark. Where the bottom of the bottle down here is almost completely solid dark. And we have some darkness that comes right down to this area. And yeah, that bottle, okay. My brown bottle, which is blue right now, I did have a little larger space here at the bottom painted to see through it. And yes, I needed to go a little bigger than what I had drawn here. Okay, and now let's soften out the edge of the dark at this place, and I want to soften that throughout that whole area of the reflection at the top of the liquid. And none of these darks are solid or have really strong edges on them, so I need to soften these edges right now because I'm just painting the dark areas. Remember, I'm just painting the dark areas. So we're painting the dark areas, and then we'll come back and we'll paint the local color. I'll worry about painting the label later, although we could put just a little bit of this brown right down through here. And oh, I can lift this now. There's a little space here that needed to be lighter. Probably should have waited to do that later. Dark on that side of it, dark on that side of it. And some of this is very dark, so let's get that brown even a little thicker there. And it's pretty much dark right next to that label. I'm going to soften out the edge of this by just putting a little bit more paint on there and then softening out into the bottle a little further. So this can have just a little hint of the darkness in the middle there. All right. And we can paint some of this reflection shadow down in here. I need to leave a space in here for a beautiful piece of blue. The other one, well, I'll wait until the brown one underneath of the brown bottle when I paint the brown. We'll let that dry. After it dries, I'll come in here and work on making this darker space. Yeah, that does. It comes up a little ways on that bottle. Okay. And it doesn't just come off the corner like it does over here. This is going to be darker back that way. It just felt like I could do this when I was still wet, so I'm going to just go ahead and do that. Okay, at this point I'm going to stop, let that dry. We'll come back to it later and finish painting it. Okay, so now we're going to play the magic. Knowing that blue, and I would just need to move this thing around a little bit. So blue and orange are opposite from each other, and that burnt sienna is pretty close to orange. So, you know, those two mixed together are going to make our browns and blacks and dark versions of that same color. And so now we gotta see what we have underneath of here. That's the two of them, you know, with the opposite color on it. And now to get this to work, I do have to put that paint on pretty thick. So I'll have to be careful that I put the brown on pretty thick over the dark areas, just like I would if I had it mixed. And then, you know, where it's a lighter color, it can be a little thinner. I'm just doing a little tiny bit of lift there. Some things that got out of the lines. Never was good at coloring in coloring book lines. And now I'm coloring in my own lines. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in and do this. So that brown bottle, I've got the blues in there where it's going to be dark. I put a little bit of water into my brown just to make sure that I could get nice, gushy, thick brown out of this. And so it's going to go thickest in the dark areas, thinner, but also remember with a bottle, your highlights actually happen by having fairly sharp edges on things. So I may be painting this somewhat sharp in places. All right, so let's go ahead and start with this part of it here. And it's just wonderful how when you go to put these on top of each other, sort of what happens. So your last color you put on is always the strongest. And depending on how thick it goes on, depends on how much it covers. So if you really want to get that toward black, you got to come in with a pretty thick brown on top of there. And then places that I want it a little thinner, I can come in and have this not quite so thick in the brown. And there's a light space here. And I already painted through it, I shouldn't have. Almost white area. Okay, I'll just have a little bit of moisture there. And then it gets thinner as it comes down and over this edge. Thinning, I washed my brush, thinned it a little bit, dried it a little on my rag. And then this is all brown into here. That beautiful little white spot. And if I wanted to shift that color of the brown, I could add some yellow into there. And now this highlight here, I need to lift that out just a little bit more. And lift this highlight down here out. There we go. And I'm going to just throw a little bit of yellow in here just because it feels like it needs it. This will actually take me a little closer to orange, won't it? Okay. And now I'm going to go down to a little smaller brush to do that top lip. Get a little more control in here. I need this brown wet enough that I can pull a nice gushy amount of paint out of it, but it needs to be pretty thick. All right, so this is the very top. Oh, let's see, we paint right over all of that. That's right. I don't have to be all careful like I was doing the blue because I already have that dark in there. But what I do need is to maintain this light streak here. That sticks out just a little bit there. And then it's a little darker on this side of that. Get a little more brown on top of this blue area here. Starting to look like a good bottle. And let me do a little lift here, a little lift there, and up to that top. And then there's some slightly lighter places. There we go. Couple little slightly lighter places. Okay, I'm starting to like that. Throw a little yellow up into this part up here. Okay, I think I need to walk away from that. I want to put a little bit of yellow down in here too. And then just a little more lifting so that it's a bright yellow. I might have to wait till this dries completely. Okay, so now we have two brown bottles, but we will soon have a blue bottle. So we're going to be playing the same game over here. And I just have to pay attention to edges as I paint here and keep my highlight over to the right here. I also have to be a little bit careful. The brown wants to pick up just a little bit, especially when it's super thick like that. And so I need to paint very gently so that I'm not lifting that up. Now the shape of the bottle turns and goes with the shoulder here. And then there's some blue right on that edge. That white sort of comes out and it's a reflection of something. So this is sort of a fun little piece of magic when this happens. As we put this on here. That blue nice and thick down here in the bottom. And where should I lift this just a little bit? Maybe right in here. Make that a little bit lighter, a little cleaner blue too. Just putting that on gentle. This is still quite wet, so I can manipulate it some without it looking weird. Put a little more blue right up here. Really get that black looking. And there's a space across through here that we really want blue looking. So I'm lifting it just a little bit and popping a little more of that blue in there. And then, oh, there is a beautiful little blue light that's coming through down here. And I'm going to soften the edge of that. Bring this a little lighter back in here. And oh, there is a little highlight. Now that this is dried part way, I can do a little lift on it without it being what do I want to say? Without it bleeding back into the space as fast. So there's a little sweet spot where you can actually do some lifting. I want that a little bit lighter right here. Yeah, that's too wet. I should leave it alone for now. Oh, except for this doesn't stay as this white down here. This needs to actually be pale blue all the way down into here. That looks better. Okay, that nice highlight up there. This is light. And we can sort of pick it off the whole way and even under there. Just sort of this glow at the side of that bottle that's really nice. To lift and add just a little extra blue there. So there's this little spot that looks like blue light in this bottom area. Oh, and even right here where this comes out of the, I didn't notice that when I was doing the brown. So I'm actually lifting a little bit of brown when I do this. I'm going to add a little bit of that blue back in there. And this is going to come over even a little further with this blue here. Oh, I see one other little thing that's not blue that has to be brown. On the brown bottle, I had one little spot where I had put blue through the shoulder here. And there, that's better. Yes, and I'm coming back in with this mostly dry and just adding a little more brown in on top of there. And this has a brownish yellow. I like the little bit of yellow I added in there. The light coming through and out of here has a little yellowish tinge to it. I'm going to have to soften the edges of this because it's not a hard line. It's a light, it's a fuzzy edge on this light coming off of here. And I'm seeing a little bit of a light, yes. Coming through there. Okay, I'm going to get back and soften that right now. Right this instant. Soften, soften, soften. So I've rinsed my brush, dried it halfway. Have to do it halfway because if I don't, it's going to introduce too much water here and then just create a bunch of oozles, blossoms. The water will feed back into the paint that's there because water wants to go toward wherever the thicker paint is. And if you've got it dry enough that it has no opportunity to do that, then it'll stay put. And we could put a little bit of this back for this little crease in the table. Oh. This label has a nice little lovely brownish gold to it. I think that's dry enough that I can do this without it bleeding, hopefully. Maybe. You've got to be careful, Margaret. It was not quite dry enough. Naughty girl. What I'm going to have to do is come in with my rag. I'll have to do that later. That was too soon. The shadowing on this first bottle, I left it a little bit harsher, and I'm just going to come in with Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, soften those edges, because that dried from yesterday. And that eraser was a little bit dirty, but I don't totally care. Let's just... These pictures were taken on top of my painting table, and it is dirty. I'm going to just put a little bit of that blue in here. It's coming off of my Mr. Clean Magic Eraser because it was from another pickup job that still had some paint in it here. but it's adding a little bit of color and texture in there. So, okay, I think we're done. Voila, blue bottle, brown bottle. But the part of what I wanted to sort of bring to you is this whole concept that just because you've put one color down doesn't mean that that's what you have to end up with, that you can shift your colors. You can change them by putting another color on top. And this is the most obvious, where you go and put the opposite color from the color wheel on there. But you can also enliven a color like we did by putting that yellow in there to enrich it, make it a little bit different shade. And so things to think about as we continue to play with our watercolors.